Good evening, all of you. On behalf of Sri Lanka Kuwait chapter, I warmly welcome all of you joining us today for this live webinar on practical ways to look after your mental well-being. Well, I'm Sachini Aryavikrama, an executive committee member of Sri Lanka Kuwait chapter. If you are a CA member, please mention your membership number in the chat box so that you can claim the CPD hours for this session. And if you seek any clarifications from our speaker, you can submit the text question in Q&A section at any time during the presentation, and we will address those in our Q&A session. Well, in today's world, we face many challenges that impact our mental health, such as stress, anxiety, and feelings of isolation. So it's essential that we empower ourselves with knowledge and tools to care for, to safeguard our mental well-being. So during today's session, we will discuss what is mental well-being and approaches for sustaining mental well-being, how to deal with stress in the workplace, and importance of prompt identification of mental illness and timely intervention. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our session speaker today, Dr. Stefan Carbone. Dr. Stefan Carbone is a former GP and the founder and CEO of the Prevention United, an Australian medical health promotion charity. While Dr. Stefan has considerable experience helping people experiencing mental health difficulties, nowadays he's working on ways to promote people's mental well-being and prevent mental health conditions like depression and anxiety disorders from occurring in the first place. So without taking much time, I will hand it over to our speaker. Over to you, Dr. Stefan.
Thank you very, very much, Sachini, and thank you for the kind invitation to speak to your members this afternoon in your time, this evening in mine. So as you said, my presentation is focused on practical ways to look after your mental well-being. So to start, I just want to reiterate the learning objectives or the focus of the talk. I would like to explain the difference between mental well-being and mental ill health and how the two are related, what influences our mental well-being and can cause stress and mental health conditions like depression and anxiety, some personal self-care and stress management tips, including what we can do in the workplace to manage and prevent mental health conditions, and also how to recognise and respond to mental distress. So to begin, every culture is a little bit different, and so I think it's important for me to give a little bit of background or context to what I mean by mental health. In Australia, the term actually has tended to become a little bit mixed up with the idea of mental ill health. And so when many people in Australia hear this term, they immediately start to think of conditions like depression, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, schizophrenia and other conditions. But really mental health is much broader than that. And we think it's better to think of mental health as like an umbrella term, an overarching term, for the full spectrum of our human psychological experiences. In essence, it's about how we think, how we feel, how we perceive with our senses, how we relate to others, and how we function in the world, in our life. And in fact, it's important to recognise that mental health has at least two broad dimensions, the mental well-being dimension and the dimension of mental ill health. And so mental well-being is all about feeling, emotionally, generally happy and satisfied with life. It doesn't mean you don't have any negative emotions. They're all normal parts of life, sadness, worry, frustration. But it's about learning to recognise, express and manage them effectively. But mental well-being isn't just about how we feel, it's also how we function, both psychologically and socially. It's about feeling good about oneself, having a positive sense of self-esteem. being able to manage stress, being able to fulfill responsibilities, and to be productive. It's also about connecting and relating well to others and feeling a sense of belonging, a sense of connection within your family, your group, your workplace, or your community. And it's also about having a sense of hope, a sense of purpose and meaning in life, and being able to fulfill your own potential and as well as contributing to others. By contrast, mental ill health that's also an umbrella term for a range of changes in our thoughts, our feelings, our perceptions and behaviours that are characterised by distress, interference with interpersonal relationships, and also some impairment of our ability to do things day to day, whether that's in study, in work, or more broadly in life. And here in Australia, we often talk about experiences like psychological distress or mental health difficulties, or another term that's often used is mental health conditions or mental disorders. And some people use the term mental illness. So it's all part of that general group of experiences that fall under the category of mental ill health. And so the relationship between mental well-being on the one hand and mental ill health on the other hand is complex, but one easy and simple way to think about it is that it's part of a long continuum of experiences. And so on the one hand, on the left-hand side of this screen, someone may experience, good mental health or high mental well-being. And at the other end of the spectrum, someone may experience symptoms of very severe mental health conditions, such as severe depression, severe anxiety. And so on this continuum, it's important that we try to stay towards the more positive or good mental health end of the spectrum and try to stay away from the stress, distress, mental ill health end if we can. And I'll explain how we can do that in a moment. So I just wanted to re-emphasize that, mental health is really an umbrella term for how we think, feel, perceive, and act. And it has those two broad dimensions, mental well-being and mental ill health. And the critical thing for all of us to remember is that we all have a level of mental health. It's part of the human condition. It's part of the human experience. And therefore, we need to learn how we can look after our mental well-being and try to reduce our risk or likelihood of experiencing mental ill health or a mental health condition. So the way to understand that is to, first of all, understand what exactly influences our mental health. And we know that our mental health is not fixed. It's not set at the same point all the time, but instead it varies, and it varies constantly under the influence of a wide range of factors. Now, some of these factors exert a positive influence on our mental health, and in the medical jargon, we call those protective factors. And obviously then some factors can exert a negative influence or interfere with our mental health. And again, in the jargon, we call those risk factors. Now, if you look at these factors, some of them are basically quite unique to us. I mean, partly our mental health is influenced by biology, so our genetic profile, our personality, our makeup, but also the experiences that we have in our life and our own personal actions and behaviour, the life choices we make. But a lot of the factors that influence our mental health actually exist in the external environments around us, the environments in which we are born, in which we learn, we work, we play and live, as well as our socio-economic circumstances. And we know that certain disadvantaged situations can actually heighten or increase our risk of mental ill health. And the other critical thing to remember is that different factors influence our mental well-being at different life stages. So what affects the mental well-being of children and adolescents is different to what affects the mental well-being of adults and older adults as well. But then there are some things that are similar right across the life course. Now, here's just a small snapshot of some of the things that, have a positive influence on our mental health. We know that regular physical activity, high quality diet, good sleep, having certain psychological skills that we'll talk about in a moment, when there's secure attachment between a parent and their child, there's a good home life and family situation, when we're connected to others and we have social support, when we go to school, that there's a positive school climate, at work, that there's an emphasis on psychosocial safety, and from a economic perspective, that we have an adequate income, we're employed, we have a roof over our head and stable and affordable housing, and in our communities there's high levels of cohesion and trust, and also we have contact and access to nature. On the flip side, there are a whole range of negative influences. Some of these are the opposite of the positive influences. Some of them are just negative influences in their own right. And so, for example, smoking, excessive alcohol use, illicit drug use. Child abuse and neglect is unfortunately and sadly one of the biggest causes of depression, anxiety, and other mental health conditions in our country, but also globally. Family and domestic violence, bullying and cyberbullying, loneliness and social isolation. So there's a whole lot of negative influences in our external environment that can contribute to poor mental health. So the question is, well, what can we do about it? How can we look after our mental well-being and manage stress? So firstly, to understand stress. Now, stress is a normal human experience, and it's not always bad. In fact, a little bit of stress can actually psych us up and get us ready for action. And this is shown in this famous diagram where too little stress and our performance, is subpar. But too much stress actually also is problematic because it sort of overwhelms us and interferes with our performance. And there's this Goldilocks zone or sweet spot of optimal stress where there's enough stress to motivate us and get us going, but not too much to overwhelm us. And so too much stress can increase our risk of mental health conditions, particularly if we have some sort of underlying vulnerability, whether that's a genetic predisposition or because of some early childhood traumas or other experiences. And so in essence, we need to be careful that we stay, on this side of the curve and don't slip over onto that side. So as we said before, because we all have a level of mental health, and because our mental health is not fixed, there are actually steps that we can take to look after our mental well-being and reduce our risk of experiencing serious conditions like depression, anxiety, and we call this self-care. Now, I want to emphasize that the looking after your mental health is important, but we also clearly need to create healthy or mentally healthy environments around people as well. So it's a bit of a sort of dual responsibility. We can do things for ourselves, but collectively as a community, as a society, we also have to make sure that we try to create the best possible home environments, school environments, workplace environments for people as well. So self-care can be defined as the intentional and proactive steps people can take each day to manage stress and look after their mental well-being. Now, different strategies work for different people, although there are some things that will work for most of us. But it's therefore important to have what we would call a toolkit of different strategies and not just rely on one strategy to try to look after your mental well-being all the time. So the thing about self-care is it creates a certain level of buffer or protection against stress and helps us to stay at that positive end of the mental health continuum. Now, some people think that self-care, it's an indulgence, it's being a bit selfish and self-centered, but in truth, it's really important to look after your mental health, just like you look after your physical health. And it's really something that we all need to learn and practice and make part of our lives. But the other thing to remember is even if you follow all these steps and use all these strategies, that won't make you invincible or invulnerable. We all have a bit of a breaking point, and it's important to know when things are mounting up too much and we are starting to experience, stress or mental illness. And that's when we need to also reach out to others for support. And that's part of self-care, knowing when to ask for help, knowing when to, seek external support. So we can group some of these activities into these 6 categories, and I'll go through each of those in turn. So this is not rocket science. This is, there's a lot of things that are fairly intuitive and we know these, but we just need to work on them so that they become regular habits. So physical activity is not just good for your physical health, for your heart, for your lungs, for your weight. It's also good for your mind. So we need to move to improve our mood. So, we encourage people to get active, go join a gym, participate in a team sport, or just go, for a walk on your own or part of a walking group. We know that what we eat, oddly enough, what we eat can actually affect our mood because of the way food is processed in our intestines, in our guts, and some of the chemicals that the bacteria in our intestine release can actually interfere with our mood. And so it's very, very important that we eat a high quality diet and avoid junk food or highly processed food, and that we stick to fresh fruit, veggies, and nuts and whole foods as much as we can. Getting enough sleep is really, really important. Too many people, try to burn the candle at both ends, as the expression goes. Not going to bed early enough, waking up too early, not getting enough sleep to repair and restore. And, in adolescence, that's a particular problem. And one of the reasons why we see high rates of depression, because young people are stuck on their screens and they're not getting enough sleep and they're waking up irritable and grumpy, and that's causing them stress and problems during the day. Obviously, as we said, not smoking, drinking responsibly, and avoiding illicit drugs helps to prevent the harm these substances can do to our mind, our brain, and our body. We all lead busy lives, but, sometimes the most important thing is to just slow down and do less, because slowing down helps to dial down or reduce the flight or flight hormones, the stress hormones that can keep us on edge and damage our health. So things like cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline. So there's various ways that we can relax our body through slow, deep breathing, through progressive muscle relaxation, through yoga, anything that reduces the tension for you. You just need to, try to de-stress sometimes. We encourage people to, put away their screens, and get out into nature. We know that contact with the environment is good for our mental health. So is listening to music, reading a good book, going to a movie, a play, or participating somehow in some sort of artistic endeavor or pursuit. Clear your mind, practice mindfulness meditation. That allows us to focus on the here and now rather than worrying about our past and what happened and things that we can't change, or thinking too far into the future where we don't know what's going to happen really, and we just need to wait and see. And there's nowadays so many different apps that you can download that teach you meditation practice, and so many groups and programs that you can join. And here in Australia, we have a group called Smiling Mind, and in the UK, an app called Headspace. We also need to be conscious and understand and in touch with our feelings. Now, remember, it's impossible to feel happy and calm and satisfied all the time. Negative emotions are normal reactions in certain situations. When things go bad, we're going to feel frustrated. We're going to feel sad. We're going to feel nervous before, a big event, an exam. But, we need to be able to monitor our feelings and be able to give them a name and recognize how we're feeling so that we can communicate that to ourselves and to others. And the critical thing here, particularly for men, is not to bottle these feelings up and feel that they're just going to go away. We need to sometimes talk it through, talk to people about how we're feeling, talk to people we trust. But we also need to be a little bit compassionate. We're never, we have to not beat ourselves up or blame ourselves, when we're feeling unhappy, and that just makes things worse. So we have to be kind to ourselves. We have to be kind to others. And yes, it's okay to vent and blow off steam and occasionally, be a little bit annoyed, but violence and aggression is never okay. And we should never, yell and carry on and be aggressive to others. So, monitor for distress. Don't be a superhero. Reach out if you need help or you're finding it tough. Now, this section is one of the most important ones, I think, because it goes to the heart of what influences our mood. And often people think it's what happens to them that creates sadness or worry or disappointment. And that's true to a degree. But it's also about how we think about that situation, the way we perceive it. And so in psychology, we have come to realize that it's not like something directly makes us feel or behave in a particular way. It depends on what belief we have about that situation. So we all have this little voice inside our head that keeps talking to us and saying things. And a situation happens and we start to think about it in a particular way, but sometimes our thoughts are not always accurate or helpful. Humans have a tendency to always focus more on the negatives than the positives. And we all have a tendency to often misinterpret situations in that negative way. And so tuning into your thought processes and modifying how we think can dramatically change the way we feel. So this is a list of what we call common thinking errors, things that, every single person falls into the trap sometimes of blaming themselves or thinking in black and white terms or ignoring the positives or catastrophizing and overthinking things or thinking that we have to do something rather than realizing we have a choice and it's up to us. So there's a whole list of thought errors there that I won't go into in each one, and I'm happy to share the slide deck so that you can have a look at it afterwards. But the key thing is to recognize that because how we think can affect how we feel, and because we don't always think straight, and sometimes we fall into these thinking errors, these traps, we need to just ask ourselves, step back, reflect, and have a bit of a conversation with ourselves, a reality check. We need to ask ourselves, what's the evidence for this thought? Am I right or am I jumping to conclusions here? How can I find out if it's true? Are there other ways to look at this situation? What else could this mean? If I were being positive, how would I view the situation? And then you can put things in perspective. What's the best thing that could happen? What's the worst thing that can happen? And you go through this process of trying to critique your own thought processes to make sure that, they're balanced, they're fair, you're keeping things in perspective, and you're following through with a more accurate reframe of the situation. But also, sometimes we just have to accept that, things are unpleasant or they're frustrating or they're stressful, but they will pass. Things can be bad for a while, but most often they will get better. And we have to learn not to, become, I guess, stuck in this negative mindset. And even though it's hard, occasionally we have to just let go and learn to disengage from unhelpful self-talk and just move on. It doesn't mean we like it or it's great that we haven't been able to solve that problem or that we've experienced a bad situation, but to stew on it, to dwell on it, doesn't always solve the problem. So you have to think about your life overall. What's the big picture? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? We're all going to have bumps along the road, and sometimes we just have to accept those difficulties. So don't sweat the small stuff. Sometimes we have to accept that loss, that disappointment, and move on to maintain our mental well-being. Connections. This is another thing that's critical to our mental health. I mean, humans are social beings. Loneliness is bad for our mental health. People who are lonely often experience high rates of depression, higher rates of anxiety. So, we need to have people in our lives that we can talk to, relax, enjoy time with, or seek advice or support when we need it. And so we have to work on our relationships. We have to work to create those relationships and maintain respectful, reciprocal, supportive relationships, because good relationships are good for our mental health, but bad relationships are bad for our mental health. And so it's about the quality of our relationships as well as the quantity. So put in the time and energy to grow and deepen and maintain your relationships with your friends, with your family, build your social networks. Reach out, connect with people, even if it's just through a telephone call or a Skype or WhatsApp, or have a coffee with a colleague or friend. Share your experiences, enjoy each other's company, and don't be afraid to be yourself or be vulnerable. Sometimes putting on a facade doesn't help, and it's important to be yourself, to be genuine, to be authentic. Balance. I notice this is a similar symbol to your own organization's logo. I mean, humans need variety, and we need a bit of balance in our life. And one of the big problems at the moment is we take on too much, and we don't have enough time to relax, connect with others, have fun, or pursue interests, as I've said. So, remember this, build in time each day. At work, take the lunch break as often as you can, rather than skipping it every day, every week. Don't work long hours every day or every week. I mean, sometimes you have deadlines. Sometimes you can't avoid a long day. But if you're doing it day after day after day, week after week after week, it'll wear you down, and it'll cause stress and potentially lead to depression and anxiety. So take a break, take your holidays when they're due. At home, try to have a balance, with the housework, whoever does that, share the load. And with our kids, well, we often, get them involved in a whole lot of extracurricular activities, sport, music, etc. But then we don't have any time, to ourselves or with them. So don't overdo those things, and, have fun. Schedule in the downtime to enjoy pleasant and relaxing activities. Another big thing about mental well-being is that humans need to have a sense of direction, a sense of purpose, a sense of where they're heading, and have some meaning. And when we lose that sense of direction, or we feel that we don't have a sense of purpose and meaning in life, we often feel flat and demoralized, and sometimes again we can start to feel depressed or anxious. So you've got to find that purpose, that thing that gets you out of bed each day, that thing that gives you meaning and satisfaction, whether it's a hobby, a sport, a job, whatever it is. And we know that, for example, people who volunteer or do things for others often feel that good feeling of satisfaction and meaning, because it's not just about living the life that's good for us, it's about how we contribute to others as well, that often gives you that sense of mental well-being. So to summarize this section, it is about saying that self-care is an important part of staying mentally healthy and well. And it's important for you to create your own personal self-care toolkit that include the strategies that you enjoy, but also that work for you. But the thing to remember is you need to do them on a regular basis. Build them into your daily or weekly routine. And as I said, most of the strategies are not rocket science, but it's about how much you value your mental well-being, whether you'll make self-care a priority. Most of us take our physical health and our mental health for granted. We think they're always going to be okay, but they're not. We have to work on them. We have to look after them. And we've produced a booklet that outlines some of these strategies. And as I said, the link's there, and I'll provide the slide deck. Now, I just want to move on quickly to that balance that I said. It's not all up to the individual. I mean, as we said, there are things in our environment that can cause stress that are out of our control. They're not our fault. They're coming at us from external sources. And work can be one of those things. So work is very important because it can have a very powerful positive influence on our mental health, because it gives us structure, it gives us self-esteem, it gives us satisfaction, it gives us social connection, and it gives us money to be able to meet our needs. But as I said, not all work is good for you. There are certain aspects of job design or the type of workplace culture that can actually have a very negative impact on our mental well-being. And so there's a big difference between a mentally healthy workplace and a mentally unhealthy workplace in terms of how it can make us feel. And here's a list of, adjectives that people use to describe these things. And here's a list of certain risk factors that can actually cause problems at work. And I won't go into each and every one of these, but there are things that relate to the job, and there are things that relate to the workplace culture or the way the policies and procedures work. So, for example, if you've got low job clarity, you've got a lot to do and little control of your job and not a lot of support, that can lead to stress and distress. If you're in a situation where, there's favoritism and nepotism and you don't get due recognition for the work you put in, or there's bullying and conflict, that's a recipe for disaster. So there's a whole lot of factors in the workplace that can be problematic. So it's up to everyone who works in that workplace to create a mentally healthy environment. It's a shared responsibility between staff, managers, senior leaders, and employers. And it's really about accentuating the positive and eliminating the negative where we can. So in Australia, we've got a sort of an acronym, or to describe what's needed. Promote the positives, protect workers' well-being, respond to and support people who are experiencing distress or having thoughts of suicide. And there's a whole lot of ways that we can do that, from giving people more autonomy over their work, making schedules flexible and predictable, respecting boundaries between work, giving people rest breaks, access to paid annual leave, a proper wage, allow people at work to make decisions about how the place runs, build a positive culture of gratitude and recognition, of inclusion and belonging, foster collaboration, teamwork, and provide clear and fair pathways for career advancement. So this needs leadership, and it needs commitment, and it needs someone to be accountable. It also needs a plan, and that should be developed jointly by staff and management. And you also need to start measuring these things. Is this happening? Are staff telling you it's a good place to work or not? And it all requires time and tools and financial resources. So the last part of my talk, which I'll go through quite quickly, is what to do when all of these things don't work and you start to feel that stress level rise, you're starting to feel distressed. So it's very common to experience conditions like depression and anxiety. In Australia, almost half of the population at some time in their life will have an episode of depression or anxiety. And that can range from very mild to very severe. And although the signs and symptoms vary for each condition, there's a level of overlap in how these conditions make you feel. We experience physical changes. When we feel anxious, it's about tension, restlessness, and fidgetiness. When we're experiencing depression, it's often a lack of energy and feeling tired and fatigued, or having trouble sleeping, or having changes in your appetite, or getting a lot of headaches and aches and pains, and just generally not feeling well physically. Obviously, there's emotional changes. We start to feel worried all the time. We can't stop worrying, and we become fearful and panicky. Or when we're depressed, it might be this persistent or intense feeling of sadness or emptiness or low mood, and we lose pleasure and interest in the things that we used to enjoy. And so for some people, it's more about irritability and moodiness and frustration and getting angry really quickly. That can be a sign of mental ill health. For example, depression amongst men often manifests as irritability and anger rather than sadness. Our thoughts change. We find it hard to concentrate, hard to focus, hard to remember things. We got so much going on in our head, it's hard to switch off. We're distracted, we're worried, we're preoccupied. We always think of the worst case scenario and all the bad things that can happen, or we become very pessimistic, self-critical, self-blaming, and very negative about ourselves, our life, and our future. And at times we can start to think that our life is not worth living. In our behavior, we can lose drive, motivation. We find it really hard to do the things we need to do. Our productivity at work or our performance drops. We become more withdrawn and cut ourselves off from people. We may get into arguments. Some people smoke or drink to cope. Some people take drugs to escape or feel better. And unfortunately, sadly, some people start to harm themselves when they're feeling very distressed. So there's two things that we need to impress upon people. First, it's about being able to understand and recognize when someone you know or you care about is feeling this way. We need to reach out. We need to be aware and ask people, are you okay? This is the name of a campaign here in Australia. And they give some tips about what we need to do. You know, ask people how they're feeling. You know, when they tell you that, things are tough, we need to listen and show some support and empathy. You know, we don't have to be a doctor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. We just need to encourage them to see the right people and seek help and help them connect with those services. And we also just need to check in and make sure they're following through and doing what we recommended. And for ourselves, we have to recognize one really basic thing, that it's okay to not feel okay. And mental health conditions like depression or anxiety or other conditions are not a sign of weakness. They're nothing to be ashamed or embarrassed about. They can happen, and they do happen to many, many people for various reasons. It's not about self-blame and feeling bad. So as we said before, if you feel this way, if you're struggling, if you're finding life tough, don't bottle it up, don't pretend, don't wait till you reach rock bottom. You need to turn to others for help, advice, and support. And it will be there, and people will be willing to give it to you. I'm not sure of the services that are available in your country, but here in Australia, there's a range of different options. You know, there's a lot of material on websites nowadays. There are self-help apps and online programs. There are people you can talk to any time of the day or night on telephone helplines. A lot of workplaces have what we call employment assistance programs. And obviously then there are the health professionals, people like GPs, psychologists, psychiatrists, you know, who provide counseling or psychotherapy or medication, but can also provide support and help to family members. And in Australia, this is a one-stop shop website where you can go and you can search and you get a whole lot of information about depression, anxiety, other conditions, and tips and strategies about what to do, where to go, what services are available. So in summary, I guess I want to emphasize again that our mental health, we all have a level of mental health, and it's not fixed. It can be influenced by the things we can do, as well as the nature of the environments around us. There are certain practical self-care strategies that we can learn and adopt that will help us to look after our mental well-being. But we also need to work together to create mentally healthy environments that benefits us all. whether that's at work or in the community. And as I said, we also have to recognize that when you're struggling to cope, it's important to reach out to friends, to family members, to health professionals for assistance and support without feeling ashamed, without feeling embarrassed. It can be a normal part of life, and there are effective treatments available. And I urge and encourage people, when you feel that way, to get the help that you need. So happy to now take any questions. I might ask Satini to turn on her camera and maybe read out the questions that are sitting in the chat there. Yeah, happy to sort of answer the questions where I can.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Stefan. It was truly insightful webinar, sharing valuable insights and expertise on this important and timely topic on your practical tips and strategies will benefit to all those who attended. So now we are moving to the Q&A session. And dear participants, if you have any question, please submit now in the Q&A section. And now I will start with the first question. Firstly, can excessive screen time adversely impact on our mental health? And what are some practical strategies for managing and reducing this screen time to promote better mental health? So that's the first question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And look, there's been a lot of research now on this topic, particularly as it relates to the mental health of adolescents and young people, because, you know, they are big users of, of devices nowadays. And look, yes, because screen time, there are two problems. We can get drawn into, scrolling on social media, gaming, and it can take a lot of our time. And that means it takes us away from other things. That's part of the problem. So we see, for example, here in Australia, there's been a drop in physical activity because young people are spending so much time on gaming and on screens. And as we said, physical activity is good for your mental health, and being sedentary is not so good. So, that lack of physical activity is a problem. The other problem is that, we're noticing that some young people have lost certain social skills. They're finding it, less able to communicate and feeling more anxious when they're in social situations. And as we said, being connected to others is a buffer, is a protective factor, is something that's good for us and our mental health. But there's also a lot of negative content online. Young people are exposed to bullying online. There's a whole lot of misinformation. People are looking at, photos and images on Instagram that of other people who are glamorous and beautiful, and they think I need to look like that. But most of it's made up and unrealistic. And so a lot of young women, we've noticed a drop in their self-esteem because they're sort of comparing themselves to others and feeling that they don't match up or there's something wrong with them. So there are actually some dangers and some harms with social media, gaming, particularly if we overdo it. So one of the things is about limiting, time on screens. Having a set amount or a period of the day where you don't touch, you don't look at a screen, you don't interact with the screen. You are there with other people. You're exercising. You're doing those other things that are important. And look, there are some guidelines that have been put out by various mental health authorities about, the types of amount of time that are recommended, for screen time, and obviously, making sure that you control that. And then, you also have to make sure young people are safe online and, putting in parental controls or other mechanisms where you can try to limit their access to inappropriate material. But it's a difficult world because, it's a bit unregulated. And what we really need is for these platform owners to step up and improve their products and make them less harmful, particularly to young children and adolescents. So look, it is a problem. And I think we're just sort of learning how to use technology more safely and wisely without letting it dominate and take over our lives.
Yeah, thank you, doctor. And the second one is, even though we are talking about mental health, still there are more suicide deaths happening around us. So how you see this, and what are the precautionary actions have been taken by like relevant government and non-government agencies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And look, yeah, that is a big concern, because there is a very strong connection between mental health problems and suicide. Now, not everyone that takes their life by suicide, has a mental illness, but a lot of people, that is the cause, the driver, particularly depression, but also other conditions like eating disorders and schizophrenia can also increase people's risk of suicide. So part of it is trying to prevent those conditions, and part of it is about trying to get people to access help as soon as possible if they experience those conditions. It's the people who I said who bottle it up or don't seek help or feel a bit ashamed or embarrassed, and things just spiral and get worse. And then, their mood drops, their thoughts become really negative, and then they start to feel that life isn't worth living. So when we notice, a change in people's personality, when they do seem to be withdrawn or different or just not themselves, that's when we have to ask the question, and that's when we need to help them, link in with the support services that are available in their community, in their country. I'm not saying it's easy, but because sometimes people can cover these things up, but if we ask, we can sometimes save a life. And so it's always important to notice and to ask and support people. Like I said, you don't have to be their counselor, you don't have to be their therapist, you just have to be a good friend, a good family member, recognize their distress and help them get the professional help they need.
Okay, doctor, thank you. And the next question is how to avoid toxic people if there are in our immediate circle.
That's a great question. Well, at least you've noticed that they're toxic people. And, like we said, good relationships are good for you, but you also have to know when you're in a bad relationship. And sometimes the only answer is to break off that relationship or move away from that person, because, you can talk to them about how they make you feel, and that's important. And you can try to explain the sort of the behaviors that are causing you distress, particularly, in a couple relationship or a family relationship. But, sometimes you do need, again, to go and see a family counselor, a couples counselor, or when it's a friendship, you may have to make a choice and decide whether you're going to continue that friendship. What's hard is in the workplace. Now, that's not easy because, you can't just quit and that person's not going to quit. So then it's up to the team leaders and the managers to try to, create that culture where, people are getting on. There's less conflict. And then I guess you can always report the situation if you feel that it's spilt over into actual bullying or harassment or discrimination. But yes, at least knowing you're in that situation and not questioning yourself and understanding that you can't always fix those relationships. And sometimes, the best option is to move away and stay apart from some people.
Yeah, thank you, doctor. This question is also more or less similar. If a leader bullying you, how you survive in that environment, and what are the options he has to overcome this stress?
Yeah, look, bullying in the workplace is a big problem, because there's often a power imbalance, and it makes it very, very tricky. The obvious thing or the simple thing to say is we shouldn't tolerate it and we should report it, but we need to have, that's why I mean your workplace has to be a type of workplace that enables that to happen without a negative consequence to you. So, some workplaces do have great policies, they have great structures, they have independent people that you can report the bullying to. There's a confidential, independent, assessment investigation. Someone can manage that situation so that you don't have to feel like you have to solve it. It is, after all, the responsibility of your employer to create that healthy, mentally healthy, safe environment, just like it's their responsibility to create a physically safe environment. Here in Victoria, the laws are that, employers have to protect mental health and not just physical health. But, unfortunately, not every workplace has those procedures. And it can be quite difficult, again, because you may want to report it, but there's no mechanism, or they investigate it and nothing changes, or you suffer consequences. You don't get that promotion you wanted, or, something happens in your career. So again, I'm not pretending it's an easy problem to fix, particularly as an individual. And that's why it has to be dealt with at an organizational level. It has to be something that is the responsibility of the workplace and the employers, because it's often hard just as an independent person, but again, I know it sounds unfair and it sounds, unreasonable, but if it's a choice between looking after your mental health or staying at a job, where you're being bullied, I'm going to choose look after my mental health every time. And if I have to leave, I have to leave. It's frustrating, it's unfair, it's unjust, but your mind is precious and you have to look after it.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. And what advice would you give to someone who is struggling with their mental health but is hesitant to seek help?
Yeah, that's very common. I mean, we all, feel like we should be able to cope, or it'll pass, or I'm making, it's something about me. I should be able to manage, because that's what depression does. It changes your self-talk. It makes you feel like you're to blame or you're the problem. So you sort of have to overcome that initial sort of sense of, it's something to feel bad about, or to blame yourself for, or to feel ashamed or embarrassed about. I mean, stigma in mental health is such a major problem worldwide. Progressively, most communities are starting to be more open about these conversations, where we understand this is just a normal human condition that can happen to anyone. It happens to a lot of people. And the more we talk about it, the more we shine a light on it, the less stigma that we can, have, the more people will feel comfortable and start to reach out for help. But in communities where it's a little bit shameful, there's still that problem. And so, we just have to reassure people, not judge people, provide the pathways, provide the information, have, information in the workplace about telephone helplines, about, have posters that talk about where to go to for mental health support, normalize it, make it understood that, things can go wrong in our life and it's okay to reach out for support. So again, it's not just up to the individual, it's up to us all collectively to create a more compassionate, non-judgmental, caring approach so that people feel willing and able and less self-conscious to reach out for help. And sometimes you're not going to succeed in convincing someone straight away. You may need 1 or 2 or 3 conversations and reassurance and support and going with them before they then engage with a GP or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So be patient, show care, do your best, but sometimes some people just don't want to have anything to do with mental health professionals. Direct them to a website instead. It's anonymous, direct them to a telephone line. It's anonymous. They don't have to say anything about who they are. There are always other options, and it's important to encourage people, if they don't want to see a person face to face, use the telephone, use the web services. there are supports out there.
Yes, doctor. Like as you mentioned, are there any online platforms for helping people who are struggling with this mental ill health? Like,
definitely. And look, I mean, I'm only familiar with the ones here in Australia, and there's a lot of organisations now that have packaged up these sorts of self-help or psychological tips into website, into online modules. So here in Australia, there's a group called the Black Dog Institute, and they have a product called Mood Gym. There's another group called This Way Up, and they have got products that help treat anxiety, help treat depression, help treat obsessive compulsive disorder. We've even got another one called Mind Spot, where you can have this dual track approach where there's content online, and then a psychologist will ring you once a week to check in how you're going with the program, because they're particularly with more mild to moderate depression and anxiety, the research shows that those websites and self-help type of approaches work. But for more severe conditions, you really do need to see a therapist, and because you may also need medication, so you may need to see a doctor as well. So websites are good for a lot of people, but for some people, particularly those with more severe conditions, it's really about the psychologist and the psychiatrist or GP, because it might need a blend of medication and psychological therapies. But that website that I showed you at the end of that slide, I know it's an Australian website, but it links you into a whole lot of good resources, and anywhere from anyone in the world can use them. That's the beauty of the internet and global, types of situations.
Okay, thank you, doctor. So that's all about the questions we received. So with that, we have reached to the end of our session today. And Dr. Stefan, we are extremely grateful to you for giving us this opportunity to gain much needed insight. And we were fortunate to engage a prominent person like you, who is the expert of this area. And thank you once again for accepting our invitation without hesitation, despite your busy schedules and especially despite your time gap, and also providing valuable inputs and friendly collaboration to the committee while organizing this webinar. And dear participants, we believe that we have achieved our objective, and we hope that you gain a deeper understanding of the significance and practical tools and techniques that can be incorporated into your daily lives, enabling you to look after your mental well-being effectively. And my sincere thanks to all participants on behalf of Executive Committee. Finally, a big thank to Executive Committee for organizing a webinar like this. And once again, thank you everyone, and we will meet you soon with our next event. Until then, have a great evening. Thank you.